related to district business. Any member of the public may address the board relating to any matter within the board's jurisdiction. This need not be related to any item on the agenda. However, the board cannot act on an item unless it was noticed on the agenda. Persons speaking during the public comment will be limited to 5 minutes, or depending upon the number of persons wishing to speak, it may be reduced to allow all members of the public the opportunity to address the board. With that, we will have our discussion with Dr. Charles Burt from California Polytechnic State University Irrigation Training and Research Center regarding ditch conveyance efficiencies.
So if I may, Mr. President, Mr. Board, thank you. Did we have any public comment? Anyone? Okay.
Well, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, would you like to say something?
I would. I have my tour today, and I'm so excited.
Awesome.
Oh my God, it was amazing. It was so amazing. So thank you very much to David Boatwright and his crew. I really learned a lot. I think more of the public should know that. And I was very impressed how much they do there. And
So you had a tour of the wastewater.
I'm a terrorist, and I did not cause any national security.
Okay, good.
I'm aware of. But I had some concerns though, because they made it sound like if anything petroleum based got into the sewer treatment system, you'd be down.
Well, we do try to keep a fine balance with the bugs that do the treatment, so yeah.
It was very impressive. And
Yeah.
I tried to encourage the professor to bring his Columbia College students.
The biology doesn't like petroleum-based products, yeah.
No, I guess not. But anyway, I'm very excited.
Yeah, so you had a tour of the regional wastewater treatment plant.
Yes, I
Good.
did. And there's a couple of supervisors that would.
Oh, very good.
Great.
If you're interested.
Super. Thank you, Carol.
Is there anything else anywhere? Okay, so today is, I'm actually excited about, there's a special board meeting, which is essentially just a board workshop where we roll our sleeves up and have an opportunity to talk about various important issues to the district. As you know, staff is working on a multifaceted front across all areas of TUD to look at water system optimization, efficiencies, reliability, reduce vulnerability. So we're looking at all of these options. We've talked about this during the strategic planning effort. We'll be rolling that out again at the next strategic plan workshop and in the years ahead. Some of this isn't new, some of it is new. But one element of our water supply and treatment and or conveyance system are the ditches. And as we look at all these different areas, and when it came to the ditches, having worked in managing irrigation districts in the past, I've thought, boy, some of this is going to be a tough nut to crack. How do we try to make our systems as efficient as possible, but still meet the multiple needs and benefits that they provide to their unique areas? And so I've been scratching my head about that as it relates to the ditch system. And then as I was, normally I do my best thinking late at night, and the idea came to me. I remember this guy named Dr. Charles Burt that I used to work with when I was back at Modesto Irrigation District, who's from Cal Poly Irrigation Training Research Center, and I bet he might have some information that might be useful, that might be able to help Tuolumne Utilities District out. And so next day I went online. I mean, I hate to date myself, but that was back in the 90s, Charles. So I went online half expecting that ITRC was still there, but Dr. Charles Burt long gone, and lo and behold, there was his shining face still on the website, and I called him up and he answered the phone. So that's how this relationship got started. I was also looking at a cooperative with UC Merced, but that didn't work out so well. But I do love working with universities because some of the universities are able to do some things that consultants can't necessarily do. It may not be quite as expensive. You know, we're still paying some funds, but I think there's some real value in partnering with universities. And I know Dr. Charles Burt comes with vast knowledge. I'm not going to speak on his behalf. I'd like him to start with his bio and background and expertise. But we had a pre-meeting earlier with our technical staff. I'm pretty hopeful. There's some, not that I expect any rabbits to be pulled out of the hat, You know, there's been a lot of people around here for a long time. If there was something easy to do, it probably would have already been done. But we are looking at in detail at how we might be able to improve efficiencies and therefore increase reliability and decrease vulnerabilities. With that, basically, this is an opportunity for your board to ask questions, make statements. You know, Dr. Charles Burt is early in the process here. I don't think he's going to have any answers yet, but I think this discussion's helpful. I found our earlier discussion helpful. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Dr. Charles Burt, if you would. Charles, just give an overview of your bio and expertise and maybe what we hope to achieve here, and then we'll just open it up to an informal discussion. If anyone has any, just feel questions or statements, I say just speak up, maybe hold your hand up, and we'll make this as friendly as possible. Okay. So hit the button and hit the button, Charles.
Yeah, hit the button. Okay, yeah.
Thanks. I guess I'm live now. Yeah. I went to 3 high schools: Coalinga, Redding, Sacramento. When I was a youth, I did things like chopping cotton and. Okay.
It's very sensitive.
I picked tomatoes. Getting on 2nd Street in Sacramento, I go down early in the morning and get on the labor buses. And when I was still 16, and lived in a labor camp down in Lamont for a summer, and even lived in Tijuana. And anyway, eventually I turned 18. Then I was in the Army. I was in Vietnam for 3 tours. I was a combat demolition specialist. And then I got a degree in soil science and decided I liked irrigation. And then I switched to engineering and got a degree in irrigation engineering at Utah State. And eventually I got a doctorate. But in the meantime, also I worked at an irrigation dealership down in Fresno and sold and designed systems. Not here, but as close as Modesto. We used to do a lot of under tree sprinklers there, believe it or not, for frost control, and down in Coachella and places. So that's kind of my background, more of a practical type of a thing, not all books anyway. I've worked in about 30 countries, and I have projects right now in almost all the western U.S. with our center. We have 16 full-time people. We run it like a business. And with some of the proceeds, we're not subsidized at all. We pay the university overhead. Then we build up our irrigation teaching program. We have really good lab facilities, and professors are up to snuff, and we have good equipment. So that's kind of where it is with that. So in terms of irrigation districts, I've worked in hundreds of them, literally all around the U.S. Everyone's different. You can't imagine everything yourself, but when you see a lot of stuff, that helps out, and the thing like here is you try to, once I've seen more and hear more, I'll see if some pieces can be put together that might work for you to help out. But it's always different. There are different constraints, there different amount of money, different kinds of water, it's all different. So that's basically what I'll try to do. They're going to give me a tour tomorrow, and we talked a little bit today, and they gave me maps, and they gave me a lot of numbers, and which I just about fell asleep looking at, all the numbers. And so I'm here, I guess, really to listen to your comments if there are things you think I ought to know about, and because I don't know the answers yet. I mean, I just got here.
Somebody has to have a comment.
Well, I do. Oh, go ahead, Carol.
No, you're on the board.
Oh, okay. You know everybody here? Did you?
I don't.
Yeah, it might be good.
Oh, okay.
That's good. Thank you. I'm the rude host, huh?
Yeah.
We, on the technical team, we did go around the table. I guess when we get in these somewhat formal meetings, we forget to do some of that. So I guess, Glenn, why don't you start off?
A 2D engineer, been here since 2008, and I'm involved, of course, in a lot of the ditches and the water and all that.
And my name's Ed Pattison, and we met earlier, general manager on, I think I'm starting my 4th or 5th month somewhere in there, so still learning.
Eric Johnson, district engineer, here since 2005, mostly just help Glenn out and Eric out.
Eric Hall, water master. Don Parkins, operations manager, met her there. So been around for 19 years with this district, but in the area for 40 plus years now.
I'm Barbara Balin on the TUD board, retired Forest Service, and this is my third election cycle here.
Ron Ringen, a Tuolumne County resident for over 40 years, and been watching where TUD goes for over a decade, as well as being on the board 3 different times.
Bob Rucker, I'm currently the president of the board. It's my first term.
Ron Kopf, this is my second term on the board, and I've only been a resident in Tuolumne County for 17 years, so as I like to say, that makes me like a little acorn on the oak tree of Tuolumne County.
Okay.
Johnny come lately.
Yeah.
Jeff Kearns, I'm the junior member of the board, just came on the last election cycle. My family owns Cold Springs Water Company up the hill here, small, privately held public utility. We serve about 540 customers.
I'm Carol, I'm just a member of the public. I've been coming to these meetings, I think, off and on for about 8 years now, 7 or 8 years. So I always have something to say.
My name is Travis Vasquez. I'm also with the Cal Poly ITRC. I'm an irrigation support engineer.
Okay.
Going to the back.
Steve Sheffield, Finance Director for Tuolumne Utilities District.
My name is Megan Leahy. I'm with a local nonprofit, CSERC. I'm just here to listen and learn.
Thank you, everybody. So we'll open it up to any questions or comments anyone may have.
In thinking, by the way, thank you for being here, and thank you, Ed, for looking at other ways to manage the ditch. Appreciate it. I made up, I only brought 6 copies with me, I think, but we can make more copies, 6 pages long or so, on ditch efficiencies regarding the sustainability of cultural resources. And so I thought I would just pass this out, and you can take a look at it. It's not stapled, so how about this? The team, let's see, well, it's all one, it's just not stapled.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
and Dr. Charles gets
How
one.
need
Yeah,
to make copies.
yeah, that would be great.
I got Steve here.
Okay.
Staff, we need one. If someone in the audience, would you guys like copies?
Yeah. So this is just a little bit of context, you might say, regarding the cultural resources, because it was really here prior to irrigation. Our historic ditch system is pretty much a legacy system. And I won't go over all this, but some of this, the highlighted language here for like the living history and linkages, that was in the 2014 California Water Plan that does recognize the multiple benefits of the system. And from my perspective, as a cultural resources manager on the Stanislaus National Forest, like a district archaeologist, that I look at this as as the system has already been eligible for listing in the National Register, and so that kind of puts a different focus on it, which is looking for efficiencies within the preservation context. And so I kind of diagram that. I do a little bit of background of what are the aggregate of elements that make this system eligible to the National Register. And one of the important aggregates is part of its story is that it is unfragmented, and it's a continuum. That's part of its power. So to fragment it and to make it discontiguous segments then weakens its significance. So you can read this over at your leisure, but essentially I have some bullet points at the end and I'll just read those. And this is for resource protection and water efficiencies. TUD is obligated under state and federal state preservation laws, codes, and regulations to protect cultural resources. Water efficiencies may be realized within the framework of cultural resource protection. Management practices that change or convert the system's unique ecology associated with historic significance can cause significant adverse effects to the system determined eligible for the listing to the NRHP. And here's my recommendations for today. Develop maintenance techniques such as alternatives to lining that achieve efficiencies while protecting the NRHP integrity. Develop maintenance techniques that manage the cultural landscape to reduce fire danger, but maintain the unique vegetation patterns. And finally, partner with environmental consultants and restoration specialists to seek Prop 68 grants or other grants to develop cultural resource restoration projects for historic features at risk of being destroyed while achieving water efficiencies. And kind of an example of that is pictures that are, apologize, my computer's black and white. And I won't go through them, but the one doesn't have a caption, so I'll explain it. That's on page 6. The upper photo was 2002, and that there was, to the left, of course, is the canal, and then to the right is actually about 15 feet of dried stack, historic coarsework, dried laid masonry. The bottom photo shows today's conditions, let's put it that way, where you can barely discern it. And so I'm just calling attention to the fact that when lining comes through without protecting the ability of that area to tell its story, then resources become compromised. As a cultural landscape, which means that this system also includes a very unique matrix of vegetation. It's actually a depressed ecology because it's a water-dependent ecology that travels down. In other words, seed groupings that are 1,000 feet higher in elevation can actually come down and be found along this system, 500 feet lower in their elevation. To help out there, I just have one copy of the state's Park and Recreation Cultural Landscapes and Corridors. These are very emerging landscapes that people haven't really looked at in the past, but are beginning to, and I'll give this to you guys. And lastly, this is Applied Earthworks in the San Luis Obispo area. This is a cultural landscape report from Santa Margarita Ranch, and then this shows in context what a landscape, a preservation landscape, a landscape that is worthy of being preserved for all of its attributes, so that it can tell its story. This is an example of how Barry Price, he and I are colleagues. He's an archaeologist in this area, also in Reno, came up with, just so you can see that. So I'll give these to Ed, and this is for you. Okay, so you can take a look at kind of where I'm coming from. So essentially, it's the difference between getting efficiencies and, well, maybe we can preserve this or maybe preserve that. And I come from the other, where this is a cultural landscape. Its power and its ability to tell its story is in its fact that it's unfragmented, and to develop efficiencies accordingly. That's all I have to say.
So you're not suggesting that you put a zip line down the canals? That's what they have at the Santa Margarita Ranch,
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's great. It's a great zip line. I'm just joking. They have done a good job, though, at the corridors. If it's the same, I don't know, this picture is in that area, but they've done really good wildlife corridors and that sort of thing in the vineyards. I'm pretty familiar with it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's hard for folks that are really spent, and I don't know, how you've worked with others, but we get, career focused, and, which is, I'm no different. And so that's just an example of cultural landscapes. And I feel it has relevance to the discussion.
Next, and I'll after that.
Carol?
I think it's wonderful that you're here, and I'm really glad that I invited you, because I did a Google search, and I'm really disappointed that I couldn't get some other people from the county to come here and have something to say. I'm very impressed with our ditch system. It's, 150, 160 years old, and it doesn't take any horsepower to get water down here. And I walked along the ditch, and I see where it's become a cement pond, as opposed to dirt, and I'm not really fond of the cement pond. However, I had a discussion with John Gray before I came here today, and he said when Tuolumne County took over the ditch system from PG&E, there was a report done, and that PG&E had outlined all the weaknesses and the liabilities in their entire ditch system. And he thought it was in 1996. Do you still have that?
I'm not aware of that particular report.
The ditches were handed to the county in 1983 under a purchase and sales agreement, and that's when the county had the Tuolumne County Water Agency, and then that was then TUD was created in 92.
Okay.
So if it was 96, that would have been in the era of TUD.
But he said he remembered when the county got it, that PG&E had done this huge extensive where they talked about the weaknesses in the system and the efficiencies, and so he thinks it still exists somewhere, so I don't know.
In 2008, when both the grants, the Phoenix Sustainability and the Ditch Sustainability moved forward, or we got the Sierra Nevada Conservancy grants, in there it captures some of the history of the ditch as it's been studied, beginning with those earlier studies. And I captured it on page 2, which is between 1999 and 2004 in completing the ditch optimization plan. The data gathered and messages from the public agencies and stakeholders was clear. The Tuolumne ditch system is a community resource of paramount importance to preserve, protect, improve, and to serve a myriad of public values. And that came out of the ditch optimization plan, which was the previous generation of studies. Just like successive Lion studies, we've had numerous studies.
Well, John said this was one that PG&E had done before they handed it over.
Well, we have that. I'm sorry, we have that inventory. You might be thinking of the and I gave that to you anyway.
We know where a lot of the weaknesses are, quite honestly. Maybe it would have been good to have had that document beforehand, but through a process of self-discovery, and sometimes not so conveniently, we're pretty acutely aware of where all the problems
I'm sure you are. I just said I would bring it up on his behalf, because he's not here, so.
On. Yeah, I look at the ditches as, I do believe they're a cultural resource, and we need to figure out a way to preserve them. I also look at it that they're the way we deliver the water, and I think there's two kind of seasons. We have the winter season where the water's basically free, Pinecrest is filling and spilling, but when we get the end of spill, and then until Labor Day, that's the TUD asset that we use to sell that creates the revenue that we use to fix the water system that needs $60 to $200 million worth of improvements on it. And if we're losing more water than we're selling, or we're not, no matter what politically correct name you want to put on it, whether it's unaccounted for water or we're losing it or whatever, but the numbers show that we have more losses in the ditch than the water we're selling. And there's a lot of different components of that ditch. Some of it operates very efficiently, some of it works well. Others, it takes many acre feet of water to deliver a small amount of water. So how can we look at certain areas like the Algerine ditch? Is there some ways we can do maybe some off-stream storage, or look at some different ways of delivering that water that we don't have to put it down there all the time, or make it more efficient, or we reduce the end losses, or how can that all operate? Barbara had me look at a ditch system in Colorado that everybody was walking on, and I looked into that, and they send water down that ditch twice a year. They deliver it to the ag users in the spring, and they deliver it in late in the summer they all have holding ponds and different things with that. So, I'm just looking at how can we be more efficient with the operational aspects of the ditch and still retain the historic components of it. There's also areas of the ditch where it's been leaking and it creates a neat ecosystem and habitat around it. But I also know some other property, one of which I'm partners in, that had a ditch loss and a leak on it, and it killed about 30 oak trees that were below it because of all the water in the summer with that. So there's two sides of how that ecological benefit works as well. So I'm interested just to see what you come up with from an operational standpoint. How can we be more efficient, but how can we also maintain some of that asset that we need to sell so that we can continue to improve the system and not have to raise the rates for our ratepayers?
Yeah, it's interesting. I like the statement that was put in here, Barbara, yet. It's a community resource of paramount anyway, for a myriad of public values. And that's just what you said too. It's it's tough to balance everything. Yeah. There's no magic on lining, for example, on seepage. I mean, just so you know, we use vibratory compaction if it's soil that can compact, but your rocks don't compact very well. There's things you put in, polymers you put in, they don't work on rocks. I mean, so, there are all kinds of elements of inefficiency, what in one person's inefficiency is another person's beneficial use, of course, how it all goes, the molecules don't disappear, but I think what I'm going to try to do is understand the system better. I know that's what I'm going to do, and there are various forms of losses, one of which is seepage, which is addressed by things like lining. But there are also spills. Then I have a question for you all. I'm a little uncertain here. We have in here the things that Barbara has here. And thanks for this information. In here is mentioned a couple things. One is environmental, and another is historic. And those aren't always the same. For example, I think that Curtis Creek that goes down to that Algerine ditch, kind of is there. That used to run dry, I think, in the summertime, but now water's being put into it. So, where are you guys on that? In other words, it isn't. If you guys come to an agreement on where you want to be, I mean, you can put the historic things appear to be those that were man-made. And often they created environmental conditions that didn't exist before, like creeks have water and they didn't have water, stuff like that. Where are you guys with that sort of thing? Yeah, Barbara?
Or are you talking Curtis Creek?
Well, or any of those
Well,
things.
let's just take Curtis Creek.
Sullivan Creek.
Okay,
The same
because
way.
California it's all plumbed. It's all man-made. The Yolo bypass, and there's movement of water throughout California in man-made. When you look at our entire system, including all the conveyances and the whole PG&E flume system, which has not been evaluated for its eligibility yet, because PG&E still owns that, and then all the reservoirs like Phoenix and even Strawberry, Matlow, San Diego, all these were built to regulate the system so the miners could regulate the water. So it's all one entire system. Well, with Curtis Creek, the archaeology, the Miwok habitations on that creek suggest that it was a permanent year-round blue line creek, like Sullivan, okay, long time ago. And this is before wells went upstream and other compromises were started populating the area, and that's kind of reduced a lot of some of the older water rights in our springs because of development in wells up above. So Curtis Curtis then began to get water augmentation because the miners sent it down Curtis Creek, but they also took it out, and I believe the mill pond is right on Curtis Creek, or it's a ways off. It's a ways off, but in the old days it was fed by the ditch for sure, and then so water was taken out and put back in. So the miners used the randoms and knitted the regular creeks into their water conveyance system. A lot of the water doesn't make it to the creeks because it's getting intercepted by the ditch. In fact, waters that are supposed to flow into the Tuolumne River watershed get intercepted and shunted over into the Slim Dam on the Mormon Creek side. So they go back into its mother river.
How do you see this? Maybe give me some thoughts on this. You have, as I understand it, there's a season. What do you call it? It's before you end of spill. Okay. To me, there's half the year when it's there's a section that maybe 4 months occur in this end of spill time or after that. Then the rest of the time you're not using storage from the dams. So that's one thing. It's a time-dependent thing. You know, it varies with time. Then another thing is you have wet years and you have dry years. You know, of course. So that's another time-dependent thing. Who knows where that's going? You know. Then you also have things that are changing over time, like. You know, there probably is going to be more development, more people, more demand, but who knows if there are going to be as many molecules around. You know, and all, you know, you've all heard the stories about the snowpack and all that. So there's one is the status quo, you know. In other words, you say, okay, here's where we are, you know, and we like it that way. And I know it's nice to walk along the creeks too. My son lives up in the Grass Valley, and we just love to walk down the ditches, you know, up there. How's that? They're real easy to walk down, and especially with little kids and that. But anyway, so I think I understand that. But on the other hand, is there a sense that you have to do something, or that there's not going to be some inevitable thing coming up, you know? I mean, that's just not in the cards, you know, more people, less water. What are you going to do, you know? I mean, where are you with that kind of thinking?
Talk about the state.
No, just for you guys. Just for you guys, yeah.
I have something.
Where the state's going. Yeah.
Me again.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so I was walking the ditch this morning.
Yeah.
And this is just an example. There's a leak, and it's not a good leak. It's a bad leak, and we don't want any habitat being created. We don't want any oak trees down, you know, dying because of sudden shock. So I was thinking, there it is. It's already been. You can see the dead gunny sack. So the first line of defense isn't working. Second line of defense is to put a board along the inside of the berm, earthen berm. You know, and then backfill along that board, right, to stop it. But that's not stopping it. It's in an area of high cultural significance. And I'm thinking, well, there's a great example of figuring out how to stop that leak without causing other resource harm. You know, how would we do that? And so, you know, it'd be standing there going, okay, how do we fix this?
I mean, like over excavating and then lining it for that short section and then putting native material over it again, that kind of thing? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm not, you know, an engineer, but I know I have worked in certain restoration projects, and the goal is when you walk away from the site, you've solved the problem, but not at the expense of the story.
So I had the opportunity to visit with a retired PG&E ditch tender, I guess you could say. And he had some very, very interesting insights and comments as to how they used to take care of that ditch. And it was previous to any real gunite. They used all sorts of, I don't want to say natural materials, but they used as much natural materials as they could. They would stuff leaks with burlap bags or other materials like that, and it allowed the quote unquote bad leaks to be stopped, while a minimal amount of water would still be allowed to get to the surrounding environment, which has been going on for 160 or 70 years. So I think it's a matter of that. And then too, you were asking about the community. Well, we've got some issues here in Tuolumne County. Our population is not growing, it is decreasing.
Oh.
It is a lot of people like me, gray hair, a majority. There are people that, well, all the young people are fleeing the area because they can't find decent work. So it does not make sense to brown out the county, because that's what the young people want. They're into the environment. They want to enjoy that. And that ditch system is a wonderful recreation for even people that have disabilities, because it's such a mild grade. I mean, I can go on, but there is ways to take care of that ditch that will take care of the problem without getting out the gunite machine and or piping it and ruining the whole thing. Plus, it destroys the historical value of it.
Of course, I'm familiar with horse manure, but I don't think that, that was commonly used in pipes. Anyway, yeah. But also sawdust. Is that what you're talking about?
I don't know. Yeah, I would love to spend a day or two with this fellow and have him show me how they used to do it.
Yeah, because, see, that's the way we used to, not we, but the old concrete pipes down in the valley, would crack every spring, when you put the cold water in. And so the districts would run sawdust down, and that would plug. I learned that the hard way because I designed a filter system, one of the early filter systems, back in the 70s, and I thought it was going to be great. And then, can you imagine what a load of sawdust does to it? I found out real fast, I'll never forget that one. Maybe that's what he's talking about. It would have to be the right type of material. That would be inexpensive. I mean, those ideas are good. You know what? Here's the thing on what you learn in engineering. You learn certain things in engineering, but you don't learn all those things when you go to school. And so if you guys have ideas or you hear about that kind of stuff, I really think, some of them, of course, they'll be crackpot, ideas that aren't going to work. But, we only kind of know what we've gone to school and learned or we've seen. And we have some imagination, but it's limited, So I'd say I really think you might have a good idea. I just don't know exactly what it is. What comes to my mind is sawdust.
Well, I'm not quite sure that that's what he was talking about, but he was talking more about using, identifying where the leak was and then working on that area with more whatever natural materials were. When I say natural, I'm talking like burlap bags and rocks and things like that you kind of you plug the leak and then and minimize the loss.
Well, certainly bentonite is a natural material. That's a natural clay.
That
Comes
would
from-
work too.
And bentonite doesn't, there are ways to put it in. You know, I mean, the most effective way is if you have soil and you put it in and you pack it down and all that, but that isn't what you're
Want to
into,
cut
I don't
the
think.
Sidebar over there?
But also you can put it in the canal and it'll fill up a lot of the holes. How's that, you know? Have you guys ever tried bentonite in the canals?
Garrett's tried some, but I don't think it's been widely deployed. Do you know of one?
I don't think so.
It's an expansive clay.
Oh,
That's what it
yeah.
is. It's just a certain type of clay that expands, you
I
know.
don't think it has longevity.
It-
As I recall, Eric and Eric's predecessor before him, they use it here and there, but it doesn't have longevity. You know, I'm not sure who Ron spoke with, former PG&E just tender. I know a couple old timers too. So we probably should sit down and meet, but you know, it wasn't TUD who began to line these ditches with, I'm not sure what the proper term, whether it's gunite or cement, but some sort of concrete. You know, PG&E began doing that decades before TUD existed. So for PG&E and for TUD, it can be more about efficiency of our man hours and our time and our labor as it relates to our customers, right? I can understand and appreciate that we need to preserve this resource, which I absolutely agree with, but at the same time, you know, we got to be mindful of our other resources like our money and how we allocate our labor and things of that thing. You know, a gunny sack's going to rot, right? Eventually, I mean, that's not a long-term solution to me, but I could be convinced otherwise.
Well, I think if you're going to talk about long-term solutions, you better get out the pipe. That ends it.
Well, that's.
I'm not sure that's necessary. If I may, so I went back and reviewed the July 2018 board meeting here on the initial study, mitigated neg deck. So it's pretty recent news. You may remember it. It was a long meeting, and Barbara and I have been talking about this back and forth for a while because I think there's some very important points that are made across the spectrum, and the devil's always in the details, and teasing those out and how we can create this multifaceted benefit for everything is that threading the needle that I'm hoping to achieve through this process. And I'm not sure it's been done yet through the Stantec report. There was good information, maybe some not so good. But I think we need more work, which is why we're here today and trying to bring together creative minds, not in the hopes that we're going to pull a rabbit out of the hat. I don't believe in that, but I think there is some creative minds here. But it's getting into really understanding not only the connectivity you're talking about, but the values of different. You know, are we talking every linear feet? Are we talking every type of tree, every type of bush? Because I don't think anyone's ever gone to that level of detail. What we do, so we got it's kind of like when I work backwards in physics exams and things, you know, sometimes it really, if you just read the problem, it's, you know, it's so deep and esoteric and filled with so much data, our minds can't wrap around it. So, you know, you could sit there and spin wheels, or you can step back and let's think about what do we know. Let's at least write down what we do know, and then what we don't know, and then we could start parsing through and trying to find that optimal solution. And I know a couple of things. We know that we're water short during dry years. We know we have a ditch system that's very old that has some historic value. Those are easy ones. We can all agree to that, I think. Which is another way for a team to work together. Let's try to agree on certain knowns and unknowns, and then how do we progress? Otherwise, this can turn into a difficult, challenging problem where not everyone's on the same page. And so I think that as I work through the unknowns, we have over 70 miles of ditch. We know that. They're not all the same. They occur over a lot of varying topography and elevations and flora and fauna, and I'm sure of values if one were to go walk every linear foot of these ditches. So I'm not suggesting we go do all of that work, because it would be a lot, although we could. With GPS and grad students and things, I think it can be done. We've already done a lot of that with the ISMND, and so tying this back to the July 2018 board meeting, I found it interesting that it was Amy Augustine who stated that when she came into this project, doing the initial study, mitigated neck deck, that she came with the assumption that lining equals killing trees. Okay, that's gunite lining equals killing trees. And then she said, after walking over 30 miles of the ditches, that was the exception, that lining killed trees. Now, Barbara, I heard you came up a few minutes after she said that and disagreed with her. And that's why I'm bringing this up, because I can't say if she's right or Barbara's right. I don't know. I think there's ways we could test that with aerial imagery and satellite imagery. We've even, Eric and I have talked about this. I mean, there's ways we could study. There's isotopic analysis, and there are ways we can really get beyond, is he right, is she right, and so on and so forth. And maybe that's worth it. I don't know. I'm still hoping before we invest that kind of level of detail that we find some of these ways that help solve the problem. How do we get through a drought, and how do we protect the historic, unique, cultural, and historic values of the ditch? So that was kind of start with knowns and unknowns, and let's back into this. And as we back into it, if we need to go to greater level of detail, because that greater level of detail means time and money, we'll do it. But maybe if we can pick some of the lowest apples on the tree, we can solve 1,000 acre feet, 2,000 acre feet, and we don't have to go to that, some of that nth level of detail. So that's what I was hoping to find through this process with Dr. Bird.
When we look at our system within the wildland-urban interface, the Paradise fires have shown us the value of having raw water parked or conveyed throughout our community. That's something that Paradise did not have, and we have incredible areas where we can draft raw water, which is a benefit to the whole county, as opposed to just only drafting from hydrants, which is expensive treated water. So when there's a stock pond, or certainly when there's an area where you can put a bladder dam on the canal and pump out of that in the first 5 minutes where there are no hydrants, we're saving our hydrant water for communities such as Sonora for fighting fire, and also for post-fire recovery. It's really important. Paradise still doesn't have their water system up and running yet. So we're in a unique position. We're also signaling the state that by dedicating water to the environment and to the co-equal goals, water for people, water for the environment, protecting the ecology, figuring out how much water the ecology needs. I think the debate about whether it kills or not is really immaterial. The fact it's a cultural resource, a cultural landscape, and we have fire throughout the WUI, and let's get our heads together and figure out how we can protect the system and protect the community by continuing to have its open conveyance system ready for fire. And that dedication of water, if we can develop memorandums of agreement that use that water and GPS some of those areas that the wildlife corridor and the connectivity during drought, the ditches were the reliable way animals could go up and down the gradient. That's never really been, have there been trail cams out there? Have there been students, our local college that's really studied what animals are there, endangered species, which there are, western pond turtle, yellow-breasted chat for 2. Those things haven't really been studied. And so the fire protection alone, I think, does necessitate a discussion in terms of keeping this water and dedicating this water in the system and in our local reservoirs to draw on for fire protection.
Have you looked at the merits of piping selected selective areas where you can generate pressures for firefighting. And I don't know the area that well, but insurance rates, for example, are in, they go up or down depending on how much storage you have and, if water's available. I have a place up in the mountains and I'm right next to a creek, so I have my own pumps, but I also am hooked up to a water company, and so I have a 2-inch line, with pressurized water. And what I'm just wondering, if have you looked at pressurizing some stretches where maybe there are there areas of the district where there are limited, usually there are limited historic values or something, and you could get an advantage by piping it and also reducing losses that aren't apparently showing up somewhere else. Yeah.
This is the subject that you're on right now is something that I've been working on for probably over 6 years, and I've been advocating for fire water drafting points along the ditch system throughout the county, as well as stock ponds and other things. Not pressurized, but just containers that would automatically fill from the ditch and then would automatically overflow back into the ditch so that the container never overflowed. And they would have a slope bottom with an outlet so you could clean the silt out once in a while, and they would have a universal fire plug near the bottom but above the bottom, so you never get silt into the fire truck's pump system and tank. And right now there is one that is completed in Twain Hart at the Shady Brook Reservoir that they did all on their own, and they did it in exactly as what I've been pushing for years. They have it so you come down, and they graded it so that it's real easy for the tanker trucks to come down and go right back out. And it's set up, it's a dry hydrant. In this case, it wouldn't be the type that I was talking about, but it's the same thing. And it will fill a tanker truck almost immediately. Then that one leaves and the next one pulls in, gets filled up, so that you have those trucks in the neighborhoods where the fire is immediately, rather than running around trying to find a working fire hydrant, or in many cases up the hill, there isn't even any fire water, or as far as fire hydrants, or it's undersized pressure because of undersized pipes, and they're ancient. And so you get a fireman, they're all great, they all work hard, they all try and do their job really great, but you get some young guy with a bunch of adrenaline running through him because he sees the flames coming up, and he slams open or closes that fire hydrant, and you get a water hammer and you blow it, now you don't have any water. So it's much better to get them off the treated water system and use the raw water and have it dispersed throughout the county so it's there in a heartbeat, rather than having the truck search around for a fire hydrant that may be undersized as far as flow or anything else, and wait forever to fill the tanker truck to get back to the fire.
Interesting.
Yeah, this deal with gunite versus non-gunite, of the 72 miles of ditch system, the numbers I saw, that about 60% of it is gunnited right now. So I think that's about 42 miles if my little calculator, did. So it shouldn't be too tough to, do some analysis. And I think, Amy's report said that she didn't see a lot of instance of it. I know Barbara said that there is instance of it. Carol said, she's seen instances of where it's done, but I think, there's also some ways to mitigate that. But I think at the end of the day, if there's a way, as Ed pointed out, we can retain the historical significance and improve the operational efficiencies of it, because if we can save the water and it stays in our reservoirs, that's still maintaining it in this county, rather than letting it go into the groundwater where we all know it flows down to the valley. So I think,
Yeah.
I think what we're really looking at is just, what are some of your recommendations that we can kind of optimize and get the best of both worlds?
Yeah, okay. Well, I have some ideas on that, and as I take a look at the ditches, can put them down, yeah.
Sorry, geez.
Okay.
I'd like to add, getting back to Don Perkins, I've been thinking a lot about our responsibility to the ratepayers, and to our constituents. And a lot of people put me here because we have similar values. They know where I stand on agriculture and agricultural water flowing through our county. But with fire, how do we make this? We have $100,000 that we budget just for our current way of lining the system. So in my trade, I always look at cost avoidance and opportunity costs. What else would that 100,000 buy us? Would it be site specific, maybe labor intensive right there, but we would then abandon this a leak, and then a mile further down another leak, a gunite, the whole thing, and where I am have the landscape, the black oak, which came in there because of the water. Then you have a whole downslope die off. Okay, so if we changed our methods to really be specific to leaks in a way that continued the story. But we also then applied for Prop 68 grants, and there was a gazillion dollars in there for cultural resource protection. We missed the deadline there. It was February 13th. There are other monies for restoration, watershed restoration, and now they're also calling them waterway restoration. As you probably are aware of, there's a whole new movement called conciliatory ecology and reconciliation ecology, where it is clearly man-made features that have been naturalized and are now an ecology that you manage. Does that mean it gets all the water? No, but it gets enough to support its naturalized habitat, so we achieve our objectives of efficiency and resource protection. So $100,000 plus looking at other forms of grant money, and it's leak specific. We could maybe try some pilot projects and see if we can create a different bid. I would call it a business model. I don't know what else to call it. Management model.
Has there been a foot by foot, just walking down, like when we do earthquake analysis, or earthquake, how would I say it, the likelihood of damage and of canals breaking due to earthquakes, and then the damage that might result from it. Like, is there a town right next to it? Is it just going to break into the river? That kind of thing, where you have a list and you drive down the canals and you say, this has it's high, it has this, it has that, and then you rank sites. I'm just wondering because I'm just wondering, this doesn't have to do with any technical thing I would give, but if you have a technical possibility, it has to fit in with the local, the cultural things and all that sort of stuff. So what I'm just wondering is, have you gone down, just driven down every crazy canal and, and said, okay, this has this sort of characteristics like this. Well, this absolutely depends on the black oaks, for example. Well, I don't know that, but okay, so that depends on the water. Well, okay, something else might not, and this obviously has there's nothing going on here, and obviously there are leaks here, but no impact. Just to categorize it, to see what you have. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Or, I mean, as a starting point, or, because they're technical solutions, but it sounds like they kind of have to fit in to certain areas. Have you probably haven't gone that deep, huh?
Well, we haven't done that holistic sort of
Yeah.
analysis of the whole ditch system on what maybe the myriad of values are at each reach of ditch and
Yeah.
what the impacts would be that way. Our ISM&D did a lot of work. And certainly inventoried a lot of resources. Our ditch sustainability plan, which you have a copy of, did a lot of work. But I think maybe what Barbara's describing, what you're describing, is a little different lens than we've taken before. I can tell you, we know, like if you look at the Eureka ditch, we know that particular ditch is highly unstable compared to some of the other ditches just because of the history of slides. And you can see where PG&E has piped things. Well, they piped it because it's slid off the mountain. The ditch is slid off the mountain. So the geology is different there. You know, Glenn has a feeling, and Eric does, about where we have a lot of seepage. And you know, honestly, when we talk about just leak maintenance, we kind of did that last year. That's what we were doing last year with our money, was just addressing leaks. But it's not really the leaks you can see that are contributing to the unaccounted for water or the water loss. It's the leaks you can't see. It's the seepage in the ditch itself. Those discrete areas where we can fix those, I'm pretty certain those aren't the lion's share of the loss in our system. It's the other 40%, 45%, 50% of the system that is not lined at all. But we haven't gone through and done that degree of analysis. I guess if we're really looking for some kind of compromise that preserves maybe not all the myriad of public values, but water supplies a public value, I would certainly think it's a very high public value, then maybe some kind of matrix would help us. Some sort of decision tree would help us evaluate where we could engage very heavily in efficiency improvements in exchange for other reaches that have a higher value environmentally or socially or recreationally, and those get preserved for that benefit. And I recognize the continuous nature that you described, that's important, but at the same time, we have very different uses as you go down the ditch. I mean, we have our water treatment plants are all up above, pretty much up above in the ditch system. I don't know what percentage of the ditch is below the water treatment plants, but quite a bit. And that's serving ditch domestics and ag mostly. So it's a different ratepayer. Ratepayers are very concerned about, the treated water ratepayers have different interests than the ag ratepayers. I don't know, I kind of rambled, sorry about that.
Well, that's all right. It's a kind of a rambling deal, but eventually you kind of get in.
So I've read, and it's been a while, the Sierra Nevada Conservancy grant in 2008. And part of what your question was that you led up to Eric's answer to you was about whether or not these beneficial uses were ever studied. Well, if I read that grant application and so on properly, Sierra Nevada Conservancy was expecting, as part of that grant when they awarded it, a CEQA to be done on the ditch system. And somehow that never occurred. And I think everything that you were just questioning would have come out if that had occurred as it was supposedly going to be required to be done. I don't know how that slipped through. It was just before I started really watching what was going on here at TUD. So you'd have to go to other people that were involved in it. I think Barbara was on the board at that time. She probably knows. I don't know. But that certainly would have solved the problem right there. Or at least given you the information that you need, or us.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing. Of the two grants that in 2008, The district had 100% buy-in with the Phoenix restoration, and that was about sediments coming in and displacing capacity in Phoenix Reservoir, which is historic and it's part of the ditch system as well. So in solving that, we weren't going to just get rid of Phoenix. We weren't going to line Phoenix Reservoir. We were going to deal with the sediment in basins, and that was the solution. And TUD engineers met with engineers and I'd say environmental specialists to come up with a solution that also included enhancing the wildlife, because we have otters in there. We've got species lists. I send them to Don periodically from the Audubon. Hundreds of birds frequent that area. So lining was off the table. Draining it and paving it over, just developing it, was off the table. It is historic, okay, but that wasn't a driver here. So we achieved some objectives, which is to dredge it and enhance the capacity, because that is the center of our treatment, or our water system is Phoenix. But we achieved those objectives without destroying the resource. That was, the original grant was $150,000. The ditch sustainability was $350,000 to achieve the same and similar objectives. And I have the original project summary to evaluate and develop partnerships, etc. I'll just give them to you, I won't read them. But that never had district buy-in or lift-off or traction. If it could have been variety of things come in the way. Engineers just want to do their job and just keep going, and we were having staff changes, whatever the reason. But the $350,000 grant that was to determine these values and protect all these values never materialized. So we have a good example of when you move forward with a wildlife component and a recreation component and a water component without lining the system, or, we accepted the evaporation of it. And, I'm sure if we really looked at it, it probably sequesters carbon. It probably contributes to maybe, like the ditches, there's a definite climate differential. It's sort of like a swamp cooler, 70 miles of swamp cooler throughout our county. It's probably a couple of degrees cooler. And so that has value. And that value. And I think Amy Augustine did a great job kind of pulling together some stuff, but did she put trail cams on there? Did she really look at the climate differential? Did she really look at carbon sequestration up there? Did she really look at the value of the wetlands as a continuous resource, or did she go for off-site wetlands as we dry up our ditch? She was more like just developing off-site mitigations, and instead of actually looking for grant money and restoring actually solving the problem right there on the conveyance. So I'm just giving you a comparison, and then I'll pass this to you. This is the language out of the ditch sustainability grant. And that, I think, is what Director Ringen was referring to.
Thanks.
It's the pink one.
Okay.
Well, it's getting late. I don't know how much longer your board wants to go. I've heard some good discussion here tonight. Unless someone's got some overarching information they want to add, I suppose we can stay. But I know that they drove a long way. I don't want to keep them too long. We feel like we reached a point where we shared, and there's enough information for Dr. Burt to be able to be better educated and do a physical, I call it gander tomorrow. He's going to take his field notes and walk and smell and feel and all the other senses to try to get a better sense of everything. So, last chance.
Have fun.
Oh yeah, always do. It's good. It's good life, this water stuff.
With that, if I may, Mr. President, I think we're good on this side of the table. If you're okay, I'd recommend closing the board meeting.
Anybody have
Director's
anything else?
reports?
Oh, Barbara reminds directors' reports. Staff doesn't
No?
have any report.
Okay, all right. I was prepared.
Well, thank you all for taking the time.
Thank you.
Yeah.